He paid 23 cents for a 47-year-old, refused 19 times by every town nearby. The coins were in my vest pocket before I even knew I'd made a decision. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the auction, if you could call it that, 3 men and a plank table and a woman standing in the full noon heat without shade, not the ride back, not any of it. Just the moment my hand went into my pocket and my fingers closed around the coins without me telling them to, like the body knew before the mind bothered to catch up. I'd been in Vera Cruz 8 days by then. Came down on a job that fell apart before it started. The man who hired me had gotten himself shot in Oaxaca, and his money was somewhere I wasn't going to go looking. So I had a horse, a saddle, a rifle that was old when I bought it, and enough pesos to eat badly for another 3 weeks if I was careful. That was the whole inventory. 61 years old, and that was it. The square was not busy. Late June, everything dried out and bleached, the kind of heat that makes dogs lie flat in the shadows and not even twitch their ears. I'd been sitting against a wall outside a cantina, not drinking, just sitting in what shade there was when I heard the commotion. Not loud. More like the sound of people who are embarrassed to be doing what they're doing and so are doing it quietly. I watched from where I sat. There was a man in a brown coat, I never learned his name, who had the look of someone who'd once had money and still kept the posture of it. He was standing behind this table. Another man, younger, stood off to the side with his arms crossed, and in front of them in the sun, this woman. She was wearing a gray dress that had been washed too many times, brown hair that had some gray in it too, going back in a braid. She was standing straight. That's what I noticed first. Not the way a frightened person stands straight, that's a different thing, rigid held. She was just standing, not performing anything. Her hands were at her sides, and she was looking at a point about 10 feet past all of us, slightly above eye level. The way you look when you've decided what's happening to you is not going to touch the core of you. I heard the man in the brown coat explaining something in Spanish. My Spanish wasn't perfect then. It's better now, but I caught enough that she'd been offered to 19 households, towns, ranches, and not one had taken her, that the price had come down each time. He said a figure. It was 23 cents American, or the equivalent thereof. Nobody moved. He said it again, slightly louder, which was worse than saying it quieter. Still nothing. I'm going to tell you that I thought about it. I did some, but not the way you might think. I didn't think I'll take her and give her a life. I'm not built that way, and I don't pretend to be. What I thought was something more like, if she goes back with that man or goes nowhere at all, something that shouldn't be ended is going to get ended. Not a moral conclusion, just a fact that came in through my eyes and sat in my chest like a stone. My hand went into my pocket. The coins made almost no sound on the plank table. The man in the brown coat looked at me. He was already calculating whether to hold out for more, and then he looked at me again, the age of me, the thinness of me, the rifle, and he took the coins. I didn't look at the woman right away. I walked around to where she was standing and I stopped a few feet off and I said, in the best Spanish I could manage, that my name was Frank Gilroy, that I had a horse, and that she could ride behind me or she could walk or she could stay, and I'd leave it to her. Long pause. She turned and looked at me then. Really looked the way most people don't, like she was reading something. I don't know what she found. I know what was there to find. A man with a lined face and gray at his temples and nothing particular to offer. A man who'd never once in his life been anybody's first choice for anything. She said her name was Consuelo. She walked to my horse. We rode 2 hours north into the hills where I'd made a camp near a stream. Not much of a camp, a lean-to I'd put up from cut branches, a pot, bedroll. She didn't talk during the ride and I didn't press it. The hills were dry, but there were birds in them, little brown ones that went up out of the grass in front of the horse. She had her hands on my sides, not gripping, just resting, and I was aware of that the whole way, the lightness of it, the fact that she'd chosen where to put her hands and she'd put them like that. When we got to the camp, I unsaddled the horse and she looked at the lean-to and the pot and the bedroll and the general state of things. I said I knew it wasn't much. She said something in Spanish I didn't quite catch. I asked her to say it again. She said it in English this time. She said, neither was I according to them. I didn't answer that. I made a fire instead. I had dried beans and I had a small piece of salt pork and I had some corn flour and that was the whole commissary. We ate without talking much and the light came down through the hills in long flat pieces and turned everything the color of old copper. After a while, I said I wasn't sure what came next. I had work I could find, probably. I'd done enough kinds of work in my life, driven cattle, hauled freight, kept men with money from getting robbed by other men with money, the usual. I had no ranch, no land, no name anyone south of the Rio Grande had heard. I told her this like it was something she ought to know. She listened, poured herself the last of the coffee. She said, "What do you want?" I thought about that. It had been a long time since anyone had asked me. I said I wanted to not be moving so much. I wanted four walls somewhere, a piece of ground that produced something, to be somewhere long enough that people knew me by name rather than by which direction I'd come in from. She was quiet. Then she said she'd had a house once, in a village I'd never heard of, a husband who'd died 2 years back of a fever, a brother who'd sold everything including, finally her, to cover his own debts. She said this without a lot of feeling in her voice, not because she didn't have any, but because she'd already gone through the feeling of it and come out the other side, the way you do. She said she could cook, and she could keep chickens, and she knew about planting the way people know who grew up doing it. When and what depth and how much water, all the things I'd never had the patience for. She looked at me. She said, "So between us, maybe." I said yes. I want to be accurate about what happened after that, because it wasn't like anything tidy. We had maybe $40 American between us, her small amount and my slightly larger small amount, and we spent about 3 months doing it wrong before we started doing it right. There was a piece of land an hour's ride into the hills that a man was renting cheap because nobody wanted it, dry, rocky, south-facing. Most people looked at it and saw the problem. I looked at it and thought about what it might become with enough work, which has always been either my best quality or my worst. I've never been entirely sure. We rented it. I put up a real structure this time. Nothing grand, 2 rooms, stone walls, a proper roof that didn't let the rain in. She had opinions about where the windows should be, and she was right about all of them. We planted the south-facing side with corn, and she knew something about dry land growing that I didn't know, where to save the water and where to let it run. The chickens she acquired from a neighbor in exchange for 3 mornings of labor, which was her deal, and I had nothing to do with it. The work was the kind that uses your whole body all day, every day. I was 61. My back was a problem on cold mornings. My hands had been broken and healed wrong in 2 places, and they didn't grip right in the wet. None of that stopped, but it didn't slow me down the way I thought it would. Something about having a reason, not an abstract one, a real one, a particular woman and a particular piece of ground, and a particular set of problems that needed solving. Something about that changed the math somehow. I don't know how else to say it. There was a night, fall of that year. The corn was in. First real crop, not a great one, but real. I came in from the field, and she was sitting at the table, and there was a lamp going, and she was mending something, and she looked up when I came in, and the way she looked at me. I want to get this right. It was not like the way a woman looks at a man who is useful. Not gratitude, not relief. It was the look of someone who sees you, the particular you, not the general shape of a man who is performing the expected functions. She looked at me the way you'd look at something you hadn't expected to find and had found, and were still not quite done being surprised by. I stood in the doorway, couldn't really move for a second. She said, "You're going to let all the cold in." I came inside. She went back to the mending. The lamp made the room amber. I sat down across from her, and I thought about the square in Vera Cruz, the noon heat, the woman standing straight in the sun looking at a point above us all, and I thought about 23 cents, and I thought about the kind of man I'd been for most of my life, useful to people who paid me, invisible to the rest, moving, always moving, carrying just enough to survive and not enough to stay. I picked up the other sock from the pile and started on the hole in the heel. She glanced at it. She glanced at me. She had a small smile that she didn't always let out, and she let it out just barely, the corner of it. The mending, the lamp, the corn in, that was what it felt like to have something. I've been asked over the years, people hear the story or part of it and they want to know why I did it, what I was thinking, whether I felt like a good man. The honest answer is that I wasn't thinking anything, not in the organized way the question implies. The coins went onto the table. I can tell you what it looked like from the outside, but I can't tell you exactly what moved in me because I haven't found the words for it in the years since. What I can tell you is what it was not. It was not charity. I am not built for charity. It was not some strategy. It was not loneliness, though I was lonely. It was something more like recognition. Here was a thing that was wrong. Here was a thing I could make less wrong. I am a man who has spent his life solving problems that were put in front of him, and mostly they were other people's problems, and this was a problem, and I had 23 cents. That's as far back as I can trace it. What I didn't know, couldn't have known, standing in that square with the heat coming up off the stones, was that the woman standing there in the gray dress with her hands at her sides was going to turn out to be the reason the rest of my life made any sense. That the thing I paid almost nothing for was going to become the thing I'd have traded everything else to keep. She would probably tell the story differently. She usually does. She leaves out the part about standing straight, says she was scared, and that it showed, though I'll tell you it didn't. She says she chose to get on that horse because she had no other options, which may be true, but I've watched her face when she tells it, and I don't think that's all of it. She's in the next room right now. I know because I can hear the particular sound she makes when she's thinking, the slight exhale, the shift, the way the chair settles. 31 years of the same sounds. You stop hearing most of them the way you stop hearing the wind. It just becomes part of the air, and then on a night like this you hear them again clearly, and it stops you where you are. The ground produces now. We're not rich, but we're solid. We have 2 men who work the field in the season, and Consuelo has taught her way of dry land growing to half the valley, and they come to her for it. She is known here. We are known. People know us by name, both of us, and by what we've done, and when a man has a problem he comes and asks me, and I either know the answer or I don't, and either way he comes back, and that's what it feels like to have a place. I am 61 no more, 92 the last time I let anyone count. 92 years old, and the morning still starts with coffee and her voice somewhere in the house, and the smell of the land through the window. And that is more than I set out to have by a distance I cannot calculate. 23 cents. You could say I got the better end of that.